So let's have a look. What did I say? Very, very quickly. We'll revise basic definitions for all the new people. We'll talk about when you need to share your concerns. We'll talk about what that process actually is. I've got a couple of scenarios, and then we'll talk about potential sources of support. That when we talk about safeguarding, we are talking about the totality of everything we do. Whereas when we talk about child protection, that's a kind of subset of our safeguarding arrangements, which is talking about protecting specific children who are at risk of harm. So I won't dwell on that. So when we talk about raising concerns, the basic message is any volunteer working with our young people, or frankly, any parent carer in the wider network, should always share any concerns they've got, whether that's about a child or a young person, or about an adult's suitability to volunteer. That might be about a concern that an individual child is suffering neglect within the home or abuse. It might be you've seen a volunteer behave in a way that doesn't sit right with you. It might be that volunteers are not following the procedures that we've agreed, that we've laid down, or just anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or makes other young people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay.
Is worth sharing, discussing, logging, reporting, even if no action is taken immediately.
Yeah.
And I suppose, recent events in the news remind us of both the importance of reporting accurately, but giving credibility and logging all of those things to build up a picture, so that to be fair, the stretched and overburdened services that are there to respond to children in need have the best picture available to them. Again, just a bit of recap that we're going to talk about the requirements of the national policy, but it's for you as the local safeguarding leads, you as the local volunteers, to make sure that you've got your local safeguarding plan in place and up to date, which is obviously in hand. That helps to build that bridge between what we say in a policy and what your local practice is and how that works. And yes, it's about in this place and this is where the first aid kit is kept in St John's Church Hall or wherever it happens to be. But it's also about, this is the telephone number of the person that you need to talk to. Yeah. This is the contact detail for the, for local social services. It may also be that there are particular young people that you know about within your group who are already at some level of vulnerability. Maybe there could be care orders or something else already in place with regards to young people. You might need to know about specific young people and disseminate on a need-to-know basis that they absolutely must never have their pictures put up publicly, or if parent A turns up to take them home, then that's fine. If parent B turns up to take them home, you need to call the old bill immediately. Those sorts of things may not make it into a local safeguarding plan that absolutely everybody in the district is party to, but it might refer to the fact that leaders of X group need to refer to the information that's kept in the folder about this, that, or the other, for example. There are some things, so going back to what safeguarding policy says, every volunteer within Woodcraft Folk is responsible for making sure that young people and their carers know about the procedures that we've got to keep young people safe. They're chuff all use having all these documents if young people don't know where to go when they are feeling uncomfortable or threatened or at risk.
So how would that work in practice then? I mean, is that a group discussion on a group night then?
I mean, to talk about, I think, you might do it in the context of the joining instructions that you give out to young people and their parents. You might do it in your group ground rules or your group agreement to say, if you are feeling anything that you're uncomfortable with, talk to one of the leaders, etc., etc. You will be listened to. You will be believed and supported. That's the thing. It's age appropriate. With Elfin's that's kind of all they need to know, that these are your safe adults, and if you're worried, speak to. You might talk about some, the things that we have agreed in our group agreement, that we take turns and we listen nicely, but we also might be very clear with our youngest young people that, for example, we try and avoid adults and children being in a one-to-one situation. You might be very clear to the children that that's something that we don't do, that we don't avoid. That we avoid where we can. So that they are in a position of being informed about what the expected standards are. They should have some information about, how adults should be treating them and what their rights are, so that they can shout when they feel that those rights are not being respected, because that could be an indication. Obviously, with venturers, you might go into more detail and you might talk about how we used a shared online space, whether that's, I don't know, a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group or whatever. You might talk about, consent and personal boundaries in a way that you maybe wouldn't with Elfins. Although I think the best way to introduce those concepts is, gradually, as they get older, as they become relevant, talk to them in an age-related way. And the other thing that we ask of everybody is to make sure that they share any concerns promptly. As a local safeguarding lead, you are the conduit through which we would encourage people to do that. Sometimes it may be that they will talk to a fellow leader first, or to their group leader first, and say, did you notice that X was a bit off today, or whatever it happens to be. But for concerns about the conduct of adults, for the concerns about the well-being of children, you should be the primary focus for those things being shared. We'll get onto it later, but the risk assessment is more when there has been a complaint or an allegation or information shared with us about volunteers, that we would then risk assess whether it is acceptable for them to continue to volunteer. And that's again something that we would take on for you. Again, that's, we are talking about a tiny minority of our volunteers that ever go through that process, because the vast majority of people are, doing an effective job within a safe and supportive structure. Okay, so the process. We'll look at concerns around a child, we'll look at concerns around a volunteer. In both cases, the first thing to do is to make sure that you've got a record, and a written record of what was said, what was witnessed, what you saw, what the child told you, what happened, who said what to whom, whatever. And there is, on the website, there is a catch-all template document called the Incident and Disclosure Form, which is a really good way to record that, just because it has boxes for all the information so that you can make sure that you've got it all. It's not the only way that you can record the information. You might not have a form to hand. You might be there with a piece of paper and a notebook. You might be there with absolutely nothing when a child decides to tell you something. In which case, make notes as soon as possible afterwards. It's really helpful if you can transfer it onto that form before you share it with us, but you can back it up with your own notes. But those are, it just reminds you, it's just a prompt to make sure that you provide things like the contact details for the child, for the parent, so that we can get in touch to follow up, which otherwise we spend time chasing down. Most groups, will keep some blank copies of that form, in the front of the A4 folder that they take to group nights and things like that, just so that they are there if needed, along with the first aid forms and things like that. If there is an incident for which it feels appropriate to record it on a form, or record it otherwise, I would always expect that to be shared with you as the local safeguarding lead. People might also come to you, as we were saying earlier, with those, just a phone call out of the blue, questions, queries, did you notice this, things like that. in which case, there is no form being provided to you. That's absolutely fine. I would suggest that if anybody contacts you and starts to talk to you with your safeguarding hat on, you start making whatever notes you can of the conversation. When we're talking about this kind of thing, the first thing the authorities will ask for us, names, contact details, dates, all those facts for it, because that's what they will use to help to build up their picture. Sometimes you will make a judgment that, that's yes, you were right to report it. Yes, you were right to share it with me, but there's no, it's of an order that you don't need to discuss it further. You just keep a record, you just file it. Oftentimes that will be more of a marginal decision, and we would suggest that in that case you discussed with Leanne or myself. We would always rather have a conversation with somebody and provide you with reassurance that you've done the right thing, or that it doesn't need any action for the moment, than you take a punt on it and us find ourselves in a situation down the line where we wish we'd have known about it sooner. Do not ever worry about bothering us unnecessarily about stuff. We would much rather know and give you the reassurance, or intervene and flag it up and say, yeah, that's something you need to pass on. We might agree that there's not enough to warrant making any kind of referral immediately, and that's just a case for let's record those concerns, let's keep a record of that for the time being, and you'd hold on to those records locally in case it crops up again. We might agree that you would signpost the child or the family to more support. We might agree to watch and wait, to keep an eye on the situation. There might be a case to make a referral to social services, which we do through the local children's Safeguarding Children's Board, or increasingly, particularly in London boroughs, we're doing that through what they call a MASH, which is a multi-agency safeguarding hub, I think. Again, that's the value of having your local safeguarding plan with the right details for your local services. Or we might make an offer of training or advice to the group, to the district, to the volunteers more generally. If we're talking about there are some vulnerabilities or there are some additional needs which place that child at vulnerability or mean that they're at risk in the group setting, it might be that the best thing to do is to come in with some support or training to the volunteers to enable them to work better and better meet the needs of that young person. So even when, I suppose what I'm saying is even that process of picking up the phone to myself or Leanne is not a process of, right, that's it, it's in the system now, we're starting on a process which is inevitably going to lead to a referral and agency involvement. We will advise, we will support, and we will come to a decision together about what the right thing to do is. And it could be one or more of those possible outcomes. Okay?
Yeah.
Similarly, if concerns are raised with you about a volunteer, or if you have concerns about a volunteer yourself as a local safeguarding lead, again, the same thing. Make sure that you're recording objectively what's been seen and what's been witnessed. Again, that would come and be shared with you. I would expect, any concern about the welfare, the conduct of a volunteer that can't be solved by simply reminding people what the process is, what the policy says, etc., to be discussed with us, because we have a duty of care to all the children and young people that there are in our group. But actually, if we've got concerns about the volunteers that we are putting in those positions of authority, we need to be very sure that we're acting appropriately on the back of that. So I'd urge you to discuss any concerns with Leanne or myself if they're raised about volunteers, even if just for the reassurance. And again, there's a range of outcomes, slightly longer, but again, it could be one or more of these. It might be we agree to record it locally, or it might be that we agree formally to look into it in more detail, and that we might investigate ourselves. We might, often things that are raised to us as safeguarding concerns about the conduct of volunteers, when we get into them and unpick them, actually turn out to be more about differences of opinion about how to manage a situation. So there might be some local mediation put in place, there might be some training or advice. We might agree to monitor the situation. The most serious of those options would be a referral to what's called the LADO, which is the local authority designated officer. So within every local authority area, there is an individual within social services who is designated to basically look after everybody who's part of what they call the children's workforce. So whether they're working as adults or volunteers, as staff or volunteers, anyone who has a role of responsibility with young people comes under the LADO. They are the people who would pull together, much as social care would pull together the information about a young person who might be at risk. The LADO pull together the information about an adult who is in a position of responsibility, who might be posing a risk or might be causing concern, and they will coordinate the sharing of information to other agencies and so on. So it's our responsibility, if we've got concerns, to flag to that individual. Similarly, occasionally we'll get incoming communication from those teams in local authorities concerning people who have got links to our organisation. So those are the outcomes that we would guide and support you to agree on, and then action at a local level. And again, we would take the responsibility of making sure that we complete the record keeping and things like that, and make sure that there's things on file. We would lead the communication with our volunteers around concerns that have been raised with them. So I had a couple of scenarios. These are taken, by the way, from the handout notes that we use when we do training for volunteers, new leaders as staff, but they're all on the website and you can download them and use them yourself to run your own safeguarding training for volunteers locally. To be fair, it's quite an effective cheat sheet. You don't need to have a detailed knowledge in order to be of the background in order to be able to use these effectively. As discussion prompts with some notes to follow up on, they're perfectly effective. I know that some groups and districts, for example, when they discuss safeguarding issues at their district meetings, they just throw a couple of these scenarios in and go, what would we do in our district? Are our systems and our processes and our procedures up to scratch? Would everybody know and understand how to respond in this situation? So that's another way they can be used. Anyway, so scenario one, you have a 14-year-old venturer who has disclosed to a leader within the context of a group or a camp that they often self-harm. First question, is it a safeguarding concern? And the second question, what would you do? What would be the practice in your district, do you think?
Yes, it is a safeguarding.
I would say yes, absolutely, it's a safeguarding concern. Sorry, you don't get a prize for spotting that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would take it to our designated safeguarding officer.
Yep.
I would make a note of what was said and not ask any prying questions. I would, make sure that I was being very neutral in taking on board what that young person was saying. and take it to the designated officer for advice on what to do next.
Absolutely.
I'd probably contact you and ask for your advice on that one, because I wouldn't be sure.
Yeah, and I think I think there's two parts of that. I think the response that you've talked about in the moment is exactly the right one. It's there is, if a child discloses something to you, there's always a reason, but actually that's a recognition that you are to them a trusted adult. They have chosen you, or they have found that moment, that opportunity, that space to share something that is worrying them, that is on their mind, or that they think they want someone in, if authority is the right word to describe the relationship with us, but a significant non-parent adult to know that about what's going on for them in their life. And it always needs to be treated with respect and without judgment. But that response is absolutely right, to listen, to not ask leading questions, but to let them know that you're receptive and you're there to talk. But then ideally to make a record of what they said and when, as soon as possible afterwards, and to share that along. It might be the sort of thing that you'd be happy to manage locally, but we would be very happy to hear from you. Not happy, sorry. We would be grateful if you flag things like this up, because it does help to build not just a picture of what's going on for that young person and that individual, but actually the more, it helps also to guide the sort of support and advice and resources and things that we offer, if we know that these things are going on for our young people beyond just reading the statistics. Absolutely, it's the sort of thing that you would want to make sure that you were firstly making sure that venturer was able to access support where they needed it, signposting to local agencies, to sources of support locally. In this case, because all these scenarios, the other strength of them, they are all based on based on real things that have happened in real Woodcraft groups. In this case, absolutely. A referral was made through to the local Safeguarding Children's Board, and the venturer was then supported by the CAMS team at a local. Okay, another scenario. We'll move on to a concern about a volunteer one. A leader has befriended pioneers on Facebook and actively comments on their photos and status updates. You can tell this is quite old, because you wouldn't see a pioneer using Facebook these days, but I gather they're all on something else now, but the principle still stands. Is it a safeguarding concern, and what would you do?
Yes, it is. And I would give training to that leader to explain that it's muddying the waters between the kind of role that they have with that young person, and that they should be adopting a more, dare I say, a sort of professional approach, so that they're the kind of adult professional in that sort of relationship, and therefore befriending them is not an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, you're right. And I think even when we are not in a paid employment situation, there is a requirement to be, whether you call it professional or detached or whatever, to maintain some level of separation and to not confuse the relationships we have with children and young people with friendships among peers, or with family relationships, or with whatever else. I suppose the kind of, the flip side of that is that within many of our groups, sometimes those relationships do overlap. I work with a group where there are 3 generations involved in the group. There are lots of people who have many close friendships and extended family relationships within Woodcraft Folk, and sometimes those boundaries will be blurred. But the rule of thumb that we use is if you didn't have a pre-existing relationship with that child or young person, you came into contact with them primarily and initially through a relationship which was one of responsibility, one of care, and one of professional detachment, then you absolutely shouldn't be making friends with them on Facebook, or connecting with them in any other similar analogous social media.
It's interesting actually, because some of our pioneers have gone on to become leaders.
Yep.
Well, in the process of that, so in that case, you obviously, you have to, like you say, if it was pre-existing, that's okay. But
yeah, and at the point where they become, adults and able to make their own decisions and consent and are, considered to be peers, obviously those same concerns don't arise. But when they are under 16, in fact when they are under 18, you still have to, as an adult volunteer, be very careful and considered about the relationship that you have with them. There is guidance that we give out around social media, social networking, and how to protect our young people, but also to adults as to how to keep themselves safe from negative perceptions or false allegations, apart from anything else, which is there. And actually, if a leader is volunteering with your group on a regular basis and is in a position where they can be befriending pioneers from their group on Facebook and is not aware of that guidance, then maybe that's something you need to address in your local safeguarding plan. It's something you need to address in your arrangements about how you induct people, and it's something that you need to refer back to when you're doing refresher safeguarding training with your volunteers. So I suppose the response to some extent depends on whether, is this something that we've just neglected to tell them that this is really shoddy practice, or is it something that they have been told a million times and they still persist in doing? And this is why there's always a judgment to be made, or there's frequently a judgment to be made. To return to this one, in the actual case, another reason you can tell it was a while ago, the terminology here. In this instance, the leader persisted in doing this and ended up with someone making an allegation that was grooming behavior, which is exactly what it is. That is behavior which is designed to enhance a relationship, deepen a relationship with young people, a relationship that started in a controlled and regulated, supervised environment of a Woodcraft group, is taken into a personal relationship which exists in an unmoderated virtual space. On further investigation by the local authority designated officer, despite the fact their DBS came back clear, there was an investigation and it was discovered that 2 other organisations had witnessed similar behaviour and dismissed them. This member was dismissed from Woodcraft as a volunteer, and a barring order was made to what was then the Independent Safeguarding Authority, which is now part of the DBS. So, this isn't to say anybody that does something like that should be immediately suspended and suspected of this behaviour, but it's one of these. It's a salutary reminder that a comparatively low level breach of our guidance, breach of our responsibilities towards our young people was actually indicative of a much more serious issue, which is why we need to take, make sure we're recording effectively, make sure we're recording all of our concerns, however minor, in order that we can put that picture together. Because if one person notices it and then another person notices that it hasn't stopped, etc., then you are building the ability to put together a picture that tells you that has moved from an honest mistake into something that is causing serious concern. that's it, apart from just taking you through some possible sources of support.
I'm just going to screen grab this page if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can
just
also share the slides afterwards if it's helpful to inform your own training. So on our website, you can access all of the safeguarding resources through woodcraft.org/safeguarding. You will notice that the website has recently changed. We've now got an updated, slightly more modern, slightly more responsive website. But the address for safeguarding information has remained the same, and you can find all the resources that we've got under that page. There is also now additionally a shared Google Drive of additional resources which might help and support you, which you can log into with a Woodcraft email address, or you can just request access from me directly, and I'll let you in if I know who you are. If you are ever in any doubt about whether whether something you've witnessed is a cause for concern or not, and you don't want to pick the phone up to me or to Leanne, the NSPCC run a very helpful helpline where you can talk to people with appropriate safeguarding training. You can share with them in confidence anything that you've seen or anything that you're worried about or any nagging doubt, which is a service we recommend to people. 9 times out of 10, if you share a concern with them, they will tell you, yes, you're right to be concerned about that. You should report that to the appropriate authorities. But sometimes it is helpful to people to have an independent and confidential third party to help them to come to that judgment. There's an organisation called Health Assured. Really, they're a provider of employee assistance programs, and they provide the sort of health support and advice to Woodcraft Folk staff. But as part of our deal with them, we can also access that same support and advice for our volunteers. If you are a volunteer, particularly in a lead safeguarding role, or if you're dealing with some safeguarding issues locally, we know that can bring up, obviously it's stressful in itself. It can also bring up things for people. It can be triggering because of events in people's pasts or whatever. You can talk confidentially to Health Assured. They have a telephone advice line. They can arrange telephone counselling, online counselling, or even one-to-one counselling face-to-face. If you contact them, if you use the top secret username Woodcraft and the password Folk, you can access things to the same extent as members of staff within the organisation can. So as volunteers dealing with safeguarding issues, that's always an option open to you. The other thing I would recommend, apart from our own safeguarding training, the National Youth Agency have recently launched what they're calling their Safeguarding Hub, which has got lots of resources that are perhaps a little bit more generic than stuff that's written directly for Woodcraft Folk, but they are designed to be applicable for the whole of the youth sector. There are examples of risk assessments, there are handouts, there are guidance policy documents and things like that, but there's also some excellent training on there, which is actually the training that we're recommending that group coordinators and safeguarding leads in particular follow. There's an introduction to safeguarding. To be honest, if you are remotely familiar with the territory, it will take you between half an hour and an hour to complete. But it's a useful refresher, and we'll go into some of the stuff I've focused mostly on our own policies and procedures and what we would do. There are there's obviously, for anyone who's had a safeguarding role or done any safeguarding training in the past, there are all those things that we need to keep on the top of our minds about likely indicators of abuse, those signs and behaviours to look out for, and the introduction to safeguarding for youth workers that's on the NYA is a very good example of an online training package that covers that stuff off in the required level of detail.